Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So we'll see if they're ready here. So I'll do a quick introduction. Hi, and thanks for coming. My name is Teresa Martineau, and I work in the research group. And this talk that we've set up for you today, we've asked a couple of folks from Shepherd's Counseling Services to come and talk to you. Shepherd's, as you may have seen in the blurb, and they'll talk to you a little bit more about Shepherd's, really is an organization that's set up to help adult survivors of sexual childhood abuse in their primary mission. And I asked them to come and do a talk around how to help protect your children, because there's a large parent group at Microsoft. I have young children of my own. I have a lot of I have a lot of history with Shepherds. I've volunteered with Shepherds in the past. Gosh, I want to say it was maybe even 10 years ago I started volunteering, and I haven't been as active recently, and just kind of got reconnected with them and thought this would be a great topic for folks. So with that, Jill is here, and Jill is going to talk a little bit, I think, about Shepherd's organization itself, and then Janice, afterwards, the director, will talk about the topic specifically around how to, the sort of the facts and myths about childhood sexual abuse and how to protect your children. So, oops, here, I can fix that for you, okay, I think. Go. All right, and so here is Jill. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you. My name is Jill Armitage, and I'm the Development Director for Shepherd's Counseling Services. And I wanted to let you all know that we do have quite a few resources at the back of the room. Please help yourself to them. And if you want to take extras for friends, that's what they're there for. We also have a lot of information on our website, and you're welcome to print things from there and also, pass them out. We have our annual report in a PDF form. And that address is www.shepherds, spelled a little bit strangely, SHEPHERDS therapy.org. At Shepherd's Counseling Services, we want to make sure that not one more child has to suffer the profound betrayal of trust and life-changing trauma of sexual abuse. Today, we hope to provide information that will take us all closer to that goal. Janice, our executive director, is going to provide you with information, insights, and expertise from the work that we do at Shepherd's to help you and help all of us get real tools to keep all children safe. Let me tell you a little bit about our organization, and then I'll let Janice get started. Shepherd's Counseling Services has been around for 20 years. We're a Seattle organization. We have one location, and we serve people throughout King County and beyond. As long as they can get to us, we're there to serve them. And actually, we get contacted by people throughout the country and even internationally to try to get more information, because we are a very unique organization and have specialized knowledge in this area. Our agency began in a response to our founder, who wrote a book. She had worked with adolescent girls at the Good Shepherd School, which is now the Good Shepherd Center in Wallingford. And at that time, girls were referred through the juvenile justice system to that school. So a lot of them were runaways. A lot of them had been abused, sexually abused, physically abused. And she just wrote a book basically talking about their experience in a very real way, and talking about, the emotional and the life impact. A lot of them had substance abuse issues. A lot of them had turned to prostitution. And she had very close knowledge of the ongoing impact of being sexually abused in childhood. And what happened was a whole bunch of adult women from all over the world actually called and said, "Can you help me? I've never heard anybody talk about this in this way, this honestly, even address this subject. I can't believe that there's somebody who understands what's going on for me, and could you please help?" She also had she was a certified counselor, and so she just began providing individual therapy to these women one at a time, and the need was there, and she couldn't provide it for the need for her all by herself. So she started hiring contract therapists, and this is what we've been doing for 20 years. In the meantime, we did expand our services so that we serve both men and women. About 36% of our clientele is male, and we do long-term private practice style therapy. So people come in, it's very calm, confidential. We will be there as long as they need us to be there. We're not going to kick them out. We've never kicked somebody out because of lack of funds, and it's really rare that an organization, let alone healthcare, will provide the kind of long-term therapy that we provide. So we serve adult men and women with long-term individual and group therapy, and we specifically serve adults who were sexually abused in childhood. This area of expertise requires a lot of knowledge about child development and how to start to unwind that in adulthood so that you can change perspective and create real and lasting change in the lives of these people who suffered an unfortunate and unfair trauma. So with that, I'll introduce our Executive Director, Janice Palm. She's also a therapist and has many years of training and experience in this field. She's been with Shepherd's Counseling Services for 10 years? 8.5, 9 years, and brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the subject. So, welcome.
I am pretty informal about my presentation, so if you don't understand something I'm saying, if you can't hear me, for sure let me know. If you don't understand or something doesn't make sense, I'm okay with being stopped and answering a question, and I really hope to leave a little bit of time at the end, so if you have questions, you can get them to me that way. Shepherd's Counseling Services, as Jill said, does provide therapy to adults, and it might seem like, why am I talking about the topic of how to keep children safe? Children is not the population we treat at Shepherd's. And as Jill said, there's certainly a connection and a crossover, and I hope that through the presentation it will be clear to you how it is that support for Shepherd's really does help keep children in our community safe. That's what we do. That's what we want to do. Besides providing therapy, it is our mission to go out to the community and do advocacy and education work, which is what we're doing, and it's the community that supports this work. The dollars we collect from and the fee we collect from clients who come to us, that does not support the agency. So hoping that you'll find out about Shepherd's and that it's a good thing to support to make the community stronger and safer, because it does indeed do that. But also that you get questions answered and get some good information today. So let's start. Yes. Definition of child sexual abuse, and these are kind of two different ways of saying the same thing. When a child of any age is exploited by an older person for his or her own sexual satisfaction while disregarding the child's own developmental immaturity and inability to understand the sexual behavior. So a sort of different version of that is the child is engaged in sexual activity for the gratification of the adult's desires and is unable to give informed consent due to the authority of the adult, her own dependent and less powerful status, and the age difference between them. And just reading the definition, I'm aware that this is very familiar. This topic obviously is very familiar to me. I'm a therapist. I do this work. I've done it for a long time. I run the agency. I talk about this sort of stuff. But these are words that we don't often like to hear. We don't like sexual gratification connected with children, but this happens, and we'll get into facts and figures in a little bit. So, and I also recognize that this is a difficult topic to talk about and think about. So take a deep breath, if and just bear with me. The probably about the definition, and I don't want to belabor this, but probably the two really important pieces to remember about what constitutes abuse is that there's a developmental difference and that there's a power and authority difference. Those are the two kind of main ingredients. So anytime a child is needing to be acting or performing outside of their development level, that's a problem. It's problematic, and it can and often does interfere with development. And so when that has to do with sexuality, there's less chance for that to be sort of integrated because it's so foreign to children. So when their sexual development is interfered with, that constitutes abuse. And also there needs to be this differential of power and authority and age. Any questions about the definition? Okay. Oops, hold on here. Yes?
Is you saying that they're both required, or it sounds like only one of them should be required?
Well, yeah, only one of them is,
Okay.
I mean, they do coexist together.
Okay. Well, it just sounded like they're, you had to have both authority and,
Oh, no. Repeat the question.
well, just the way you were saying, it sounded like they were both required, both definitions were required.
The question is, are both definitions required? Both definitions of,
Well, no, I was just saying, you were saying and, I think you're using the word and it was meaning to me that was both authority and age. I don't
Okay.
have, you don't have the definitions back up there again, but.
okay, so, you can do that. The question is it required that both age and status or power, all of those together? No, it can be only one. Absolutely. Good question. Okay, good. Okay, so I came up with some common, I think, myths about sexual abuse, and hopefully we'll shed some light on these. While sexual abuse is a serious problem, I don't know anyone who's been sexually abused in childhood. And I mean, I think this is what a lot of us tend to think. Actually, there are 39 million survivors of sexual abuse in America today. And it's very interesting that you can go to different websites, and some of the websites listed on the handout that Teresa provided have facts. The Darkness to Light website has lots of facts on it. There are different websites, the Children's Response Center, I think that might be one that had some statistics. And the statistics can vary. And the reason for that, I mean, they can vary in great proportion. The reason for that is we don't have statistics on this. This is not reported, it's not spoken about, and it's after the fact. So there is a range, and you might come up with go to another site and say, well, that 39 million survivors is not, I've seen a much larger number than that. 1 in 3 to 4 girls and 1 in 5 to 6 boys are abused before the age of 18, and those figures seem to be pretty consistent. Go ahead.
How did you get those figures? Because you're saying for the 39 million, the data that's out there is not consistent. Like, what do they use to deduct this number?
I think these came from the Department. The question is, where did the figures come from? The Department of Justice.
Not only that, I'm wondering what would be a method that would be reliable to use to deduct that, once I'm sure that I would guess that if we don't know of people don't talk about it. I guess people
Exactly.
don't know.
People don't talk about it.
How do you get a number?
Well, like I said, so the question is, where do these numbers come from? These numbers are from the Department of Justice. So I think it's a combination of what's reported and kind of general population. And to be honest with you, I don't know how people come up with numbers across the population. But I would say that this is probably a conservative number. Child sexual abuse does not recognize region, race, creed, socioeconomic status, or gender. It crosses all boundaries to impact every community and every person in America, and that is absolutely true. And one of the things that's very difficult about this topic is, number one, it's very hard to talk about, it's very hard to think about, but it's very hard especially to have a mental picture of it. And so we hear in the news often of children who are sexually exploited or abused, and a lot of times what we're hearing are children who maybe come from a lower socioeconomic area where they're not well tended and maybe not well supervised. And are those children perhaps more vulnerable? Indeed. If your children are not supervised, yes they are. However, as you'll find out during the presentation, most sexual abuse occurs from someone that's known to the child. So it's a crime that is really an epidemic, and it is under-reported and under-acknowledged because it isn't apparent. And again, the direct costs of childhood sexual abuse are estimated at $23 billion annually, and that has to do with the cost, loss of productivity, and again, don't ask me how they came up with these numbers. I'm just trying to give you a range. The numbers thing is not my gig, but it is an enormous problem. And I don't know if this is a myth that anyone still has, but it certainly has been out there. Perpetrators are creepy old men in baggy raincoats lurking around the playground. And the fact is that 7 to 10% of victims are, only 7 to 10% of victims are abused by a stranger. You can read the statistics up there. I don't think I need to read them for you. All to say that opportunity, and when I get to talking a little bit more about specifics of how to protect children, opportunity is really the key. So there's a lot of opportunity if the perpetrator's in the family or known by the child. They just have a lot of access. And this is a kind of new statistic, and I guess a newer issue, the bullet point 2/3 of the way down. 1 in 5 children are solicited sexually while on the internet. And this is really probably going to increase, I would guess. Actually, statistics overall, reported incidents of sexual abuse are starting to decrease slightly, and I think that's terrific. I hope that it's because of what we're doing with sitting around and talking about it on a Friday afternoon. That helps. It does help. This is an area that's the internet, and I know Oprah has done shows on it. It's a pretty significant problem and one to really be aware of and vigilant about. Abusers are both male and female. I think there's a stereotype that most abusers are male, and that's not necessarily always true. I've seen statistics 75%, 25%, 75% are male and 25% are female. Again, I don't exactly trust those statistics because sexual abuse by a female tends to be much more underreported because of the dynamic of that. But all to say that the stereotype, the kind of picture in our mind of what to be afraid of, try to erase that and think in a broader context. Abusers do not fit a particular physical profile. You cannot tell by looking at someone if they're an abuser.
Question.
Yes.
The
Yes.
one which said 40% of the abusers are older or older children.
Yes.
So those abusers would be children under the age of 18?
Yes. Yes.
That's
Yes.
I don't know if you can talk at all about that, whether or not that's related to the fact that those are children who were abused when they were younger, like a 16-year-old who was abused when they were 4 by their father or mother or whomever, might then turn around and abuse a younger child, right? So I don't know if there's any statistic that says that those children that are abusing younger children were abused or not, but I would suspect that that might be a correlation or not, you know?
There is a correlation. So the comment and question, very valid, is when we're talking about older children victimizing younger children, the older child who's the victimizer, in this case the abuser, has himself or herself been sexualized, sexually abused when they were younger. That's true. And so this is, in Teresa's question, are there statistics? I haven't seen any, but it goes without saying. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. There's so much of a cycle to abuse, a generational cycle, certainly. And one of the pieces of this is when children are abused, when they are sexually abused, they tend to act out. And literally what that means is their behavior will show what's gone on for them. And it's a sort of attempt, it's a sort of psycho-emotional way that human beings have of trying to digest, trying to integrate. I give the example that my children, when they were little and they got trotted off to swimming lessons, of course that was kind of scary, but what they would do before and after the first few lessons is they would practice jumping off the bed, because then they were jumping off the high dive and they were confronting their fears. They were acting out their fears that way. Well, jumping off the bed to practice jumping off the high dive, which they were scared of, because of course that's going to happen to you on your first swimming lesson, is a lot different than a child who has been sexualized and they're acting that out. So it's a disintegration. Yes?
I find these statistics a little frustrating because it's very hard to see what's actionable in them. Like, so for instance, 40 to 40% of victims are abused by a family member. Well, if that's the parent most of the time, then the conditional probability, the chance that it's going to be some other family member as a parent trying to worry about, who my child spends time with, that number of what I actually have to worry about might be very tiny. And similarly, with the 40% of victims abused by children, since children is this huge bulk of everything under 18, I don't know what to make of that. Is that to be worried about the kid who's 4 years older, or about the babysitter who's technically a minor, or?
Good question. The question is, these statistics are frustrating and maybe upsetting. If that question, so what to do? If that question doesn't get answered further on, let's come back to it, because you're right, it is frustrating. Yes?
I have a question. You just said about example that you gave for the swimming,
yes,
where the kids act out.
Right.
So what would be the example of a child who has been sexually abused? What he or she would act out, in what way?
The question is, how would a child sexually, what would be an example of a child sexually acting out? They would be exhibiting sexual behavior that was farther above their development level. I mean, that's the quickest answer. I could give you a very long answer to that, but sexual behavior that, or excess sexual behavior. And that's a big question. I appreciate it. Okay, I have a myth. I have a good relationship with my child. I'm sure he or she would tell me if there was abuse. It seems like it. It really does seem like it. The fact is that most children don't tell, even if they have been asked. Over 30% of victims never disclose the abuse to anyone. And again, I could carry on long, and I won't, about why that is. So I tried to sort of encapsulate it in the third bullet point, which is when children are sexually abused, they feel guilty and they blame themselves. If a yes?
Isn't it true that the abuser often threatens them?
Yes.
The abuser will threaten them and say, don't tell, or this will happen, or I'll hurt so-and-so, or I'll do whatever.
Yes.
So they're already in a power position.
Right.
And a lot of times they'll do stuff to assert that power of keeping the child quiet.
Right, and that's a very pertinent, excellent comment. So the comment was, isn't it true that children are often threatened or so intimidated by the power differential that they are not going to speak up? And that's absolutely true. And children believe what they're told. Children are taught to be respectful of people who are older than them. And if someone tells you what to do, and they're older, you do it. And to a young child, a much older child can seem like an adult, and even it doesn't have to be much older for that intimidation of the sort of power differential to be a factor. So children can be indeed, and often are, threatened to not tell. They can be threatened with huge consequences, and so they know they won't tell. the other internal part of this is that children feel guilty and wrong and blame themselves when they're sexually abused. That doesn't ever not happen. That always happens. And so if a child feels guilty and wrong, like they've done something wrong, it's very hard for them to talk about it. So, you know, again, it could be, we could have a very long discussion about why it is that children don't tell, but the truth is that they don't. So, the myth: the effects of sexual abuse in childhood lessen with time. By the time victims get to adulthood, they have usually gotten over it. And that's simply not true. And in fact, it's pretty much the opposite. The effects of sexual abuse often compound over time as people come into adulthood. The second bullet point is really core. Children whose trust was betrayed through abuse do not automatically begin to trust others in adulthood. Adults who were sexualized very early often have significant difficulty with intimate relationships. And the trust is just very much a core point here. So children come into the world believing that they will be cared for and trusting that the world is a good place. Hopefully they learn this. It's a developmental stage, the first one in fact, and they go along under that assumption. When that trust is betrayed, then the world becomes unsafe and people become unsafe. And child logic is very cause and effect, very black and white thinking. And so if I learn this big lesson that people are not to be trusted, I will get hurt. That doesn't automatically, people don't walk through some magic doorway when they're 18 into adulthood where all this gets erased. I grow up with this, and yet the thing that I want most in my life, which human beings do, we're just programmed to want closeness and connectedness and relationship, all of a sudden that's become the most threatening thing to me. I'll digress for a second here. I think it was in the flyer that you sent out, Teresa. Shepherd's Counseling Services was mentioned in Oprah magazine in the October issue. And there's a really nice, thoughtful article in there, and I think there might be a copy of the magazine back there, about the relationship impact of childhood sexual abuse. And it is significant. And we have gotten a lot of response from folks, like Jill said, across the country and even across country lines saying, you know, oh my gosh, finally somebody's talking about what I've held inside or how it is at my house. So the relationship impact is huge. And we talk about the ripple effect at Shepherd's. That's a sort of two-word phrase we use, because it really talks about how it is that an event or an occurrence or many occurrences, sadly, often, of sexual abuse can have this ripple effect, not only in one person's life, but in the lives of the others that are touched by the person who is abused. And I think the other two bullet points are pretty self-explanatory. Oops, what happened? Oh, I guess that was the last one. Okay, so prevention and action. And this is by no means an exhaustive list of what to do to keep children safe. I tried to sort of come up with kind of general ideas, and we can, you know, this is where you may have questions. First of all, and they're not particularly in any order, except the first bullet point is really the first bullet point. Opening your eyes, recognizing, understanding, letting yourself know the truth that this does happen, it is happening, can happen, and it's a very, very real problem. I don't think that means that everybody needs to go home and lock up their kids forever until they're 18 or whatever. But it does mean that the more people in this community, in any community in this room, on this Microsoft campus, the more people that hold an awareness of the magnitude and the reality of this problem, that raises the bar and everyone becomes safer. Children all become safer when we acknowledge that this really does happen. Pay attention to the dynamics in your child's relationships, especially with older children and adults. And I realize this might be a little vague, but you know, I could have summed it up probably by just saying pay attention, watch, look, notice, you know, if your child acts differently around some people than others. Notice what an adult's interest is in your child. I mean, not all adults who are hanging out with kids or doing things at the Boys and Girls Club or coaching or whatever, most of them are not perpetrators. They really aren't. However, that is an opportunity for folks who are acting out their own sexual issues. So just be aware and pay attention to the dynamic and sort of the quality of relationship. Jill has a question.
Could you talk about what that would look like? I mean, what are you looking for? What would you see that would give you a
So Jill's question is, what would you look for? What would that look like? It might look like a relationship, if you're talking about, say, an adult to a child, an adult who has interest outside of the function that they are interacting with your child. So a coach, for instance, that takes an extra interest in your child beyond, you know, teaching them how to do layups. It might look like an older child who really always wants to come and play with your younger child and always wants to take your younger child to play at their house. If that's a consistent pattern, it might be just perfectly fine, and a younger child thinks that is pretty cool attention and that there are pretty cool toys that older kids play with. Could be and probably is just fine. But pay attention for a dynamic that might be outside of what you would expect. Is that clear?
Does it look nice or not nice?
What?
The attention.
The attention looks just, Jill's question is, does it look nice or not nice? And she's already down there and recognized the signs of grooming. But she knows this stuff. So as long as she is there, we'll go there. Grooming, that's what grooming is. Grooming is, are you familiar with that term, grooming? Okay. Grooming is the process of culturing, if you will, a child, in this case, culturing a child toward a relationship with you that gives you more access and more opportunity to abuse them. So it's going to look like someone who, it's going to look very nice, in Jill's words. It's going to look to a child, it's going to probably feel very nice. And it can be very slow and very incremental. So it steps toward gaining a child's confidence and trust to give a perpetrator and abuser access. Is that clear? Okay. I think we're healthy boundaries at home. That again, we could have a very, very long discussion on that. But boundaries is just a huge word that I say all the time because it has so much to do with this work. Show respect for your child's boundaries. When your child says no, and that's down to the second to the last bullet, make sure, first of all, that your child has permission to say no appropriately, but clearly and definitively. And when, this is something that you can model at home on both sides. As a parent, when I say no, I mean it. I don't go back and forth about it. When my child says no, within the bounds of their development, if they're 2, okay, you've got to kind of work with that. But when they say no, take the time to listen and help them know when it's appropriate to say no and when it's not. But as children get older, they pass through, they keep growing and changing, and they're usually a couple steps ahead of mom and dad. You will notice, if you're paying attention, when it becomes uncomfortable for them to get a hug from you, or for you to go in the dressing room with them to try and close. And it happened yesterday and it's not happening today, and if they say no, you listen to that. So these are just kind of general ways, but it's the idea of, if a child's boundaries are respected, and this is so fundamental, if a child's boundaries are respected, that's what they expect out there in the world. And when someone doesn't, then something isn't right for them. So it's going to be a red flag for them, in essence. Yes?
Now, about the healthy boundaries, like, do you have any suggested age where, for example, they should see the parents naked, or, like they should take bath by themselves and nobody should really, touch their intimate parts, like, to the 2-year-old, you still need to change their diaper.
Exactly.
Where is that limit, and is that helping at all? Like, if you kind of teach them that these are your private things, and you're the only one with, like, I don't know, thoughts yourself, or, and when do you do that?
So the question is, what are the appropriate times and ages and developmental stages when children, for instance, shouldn't see their parents naked, or they take care of themselves and don't have brothers and sisters bathing with them, or whatever other ways. And there's lots of information out there on that, and lots of books that talk specifically about that. I don't think that there is a specific age. It has to do with the culture of your family. Certainly when children, if you're paying attention, you will notice when they take your cues from your kids, they become a little more private and a little bit more aware. Or their questions about body parts, your body part, if they're seeing you naked, is feeling like it's time for a little privacy, then just take that as a cue. But mostly kids will give you a cue that they are a little uncomfortable, they're more aware of their own body parts, and that's the time that you sort of start backing off. And it really does, setting boundaries and recognizing their boundaries, and it really does coincide with them being able to take care of themselves more, thankfully. There's lots and lots of wonderful resources and books out there for kids, specifically that talk about, to be read with kids over and over again, not just once, that talk about how a child knows when to say no, and how to be respectful of body parts and all that. Teresa.
One thing I might sort of add to that is, I think there's not a correlation between seeing an adult naked. I mean, once a child hits puberty and they're going to have sexual feelings of their own about seeing perhaps an adult naked, I think there's not a correlation between a family that might be more open to nakedness within the household and sexual abuse. It becomes an issue more when, you're being naked in front of your child because it gives you sexual pleasure, as opposed to kids take baths together, or you just have a more loose policy about nakedness within your house, right? So, I think so that's why I don't think there's a specific age. It's more about how you treat it. Having a child see you naked so that it's sexually gratifying is the abuse part, right? But if you just have a more open policy within your house. But I think the other thing on that too is really, like you were saying, take the cues from your child. Like, having 2 children bathe together, even if they're a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old, isn't bad. But teaching them respect in the bathtub, like, that's your brother's, and use correct words. I mean, that's your brother's penis, that's your sister's vagina. You don't touch each other. It's your own parts. Like, just talking to them about it to some extent, like, that's healthy, right? But having them debate together so that they can play, so that some adult might watch them and find it sexually, that's where it's bad, right? So it's not that they're naked or not naked, it's what the nakedness is about. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, and I'm wishing you had a microphone, so anybody who's listening, that's okay. So I just to recap Teresa's point, there is a difference, a good point. There is a difference between body parts nakedness and sexualization, sexual activity. So seeing a body part is not necessarily sexual. It's not to do with being sexualized. The line certainly is crossed when there is sexual arousal, gratification involved. Yes, question in the back.
So the two lines that start with educate, it looks like
Yes.
they're, you're not going so far as to state any relationship between level of stigma about sexuality in a household and the probability of victimization or the probability of reporting in the event of victimization. Is there, what is the basis for those points? Is there any connection there between level of comfort or stigma around just sexuality in the household and those victimization and reporting?
The question is there a connection between level of comfort with sexuality in a home and a child's likelihood of being abused? Is that
Right, I mean, it seems
being
like
victimized?
educate your child about their body, that's something that lowers the stigma of their sexual organs, so, but it doesn't look like, I'm wondering where that comes from and whether that's just, it's only that specific part of comfort around sexual topics, or whether it's comfort around sexual topics in general.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, the question is it just about is comfort around body parts, or is it about sexual stuff at all? Comfort around sexual topics at all? No, I mean, if you're comfortable, I mean, every family has its culture. Every system has its own culture, and you need to act within that. If it's healthy, if it's appropriate, and it's a good thing to be able to talk with your kids about body parts, about being sexual, and to have it be something that's not a deep, dark, scary secret. So, are there statistics around that? No, I've never seen that. But I would certainly imagine that the healthier and clearer you are, the better. Yes?
So going back to your point about modeling the healthy boundaries at home.
Yes.
Right, I think, as you said, that you're right, that every family has their own culture and way of doing things, and there are some things acceptable, some things are not acceptable, right?
Right.
For every family. But what happens when our children are going to be outside of our family in the big world, right? So are there any certain standards or guidelines that we have to prepare them? So that it's within family, it's okay maybe to see your mom naked, for a daughter, but
Right.
if you go outside, then it's not okay to see your friend's mom naked and do something to you or things like
Right.
that.
So the question is, okay, we've got inside the house, and you have your culture inside the house. How do you prepare kids to go outside? And again, there's lots and lots of resources on that will explain that, but there are lots of books that talk exactly and specifically to kids about that. I think these are conversations you have, and even having the conversation with your child about exactly what you just said, those are legitimate conversations the children certainly can differentiate. I think the last point, and again, it might seem kind of vague, don't minimize concerns or intuition, yours or your child's, but children do have an intuitive sense of when they feel safe or not. And they probably will use words like creeped out, things like that. But teach your child to trust that and to pay attention. And they don't need to find out the fact that they're feeling uncomfortable. They have permission to remove themselves from a situation, ask for adult help or whatever. Same thing with you. If you have an intuitive sense that something is off, doesn't mean you react or overreact. It means you pay attention to that. You don't automatically dismiss it out of hand. And, if I could say two things that just really kind of are general, but I think are the basics, is one is recognize that this is possible and pay attention. Really look at your child. Really look, really see, really be present to what's going on with your child. And I know those are really vague, but that second has to do with an intuitive sense of how you know your child and how you trust your intuitive sense. How Shepherd's Counseling Services help stop the cycle of sexual abuse. Shepherd's is a voice speaking out in the community about something that's not spoken about. Our offices are located on the north end of Capitol Hill in a very charming old brick house, and there is no sign out in front or banner out in front that says Shepherd's Counseling Services, therapy for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. In fact, you have to walk all the way up the steps until you get to the front door before you see a sign that says Shepherd's Counseling Services. And the reason for that is that while we don't want to have a high profile in the community because it would prohibit folks from coming to get help about something that's very, very hard to get help about, we do this. We talk to providers, but we're very consistent, and we've been there for 20 years, and we're going to keep being there for as long as we need to be. I wish we didn't need to be there, but we do, and we are. So we speak up in the community about something that is not spoken up about. Community education truly helps break the cycle of abuse as individuals are more able to recognize potentially dangerous circumstances for children and to intervene to prevent the abuse. Community education helps people who have been holding in the secret of being sexually abused well into adulthood. Community education helps people know that help is possible, that they don't have to keep living with the effects, with the distrust, with the fear of someone finding out, or the way that relationships never seem to work out. They can get help when they know it's available, and that makes us, the community, stronger and healthier, more productive. Providing affordable therapy helps the healing begin. Shepherd's Counseling Services, our mission is to provide affordable therapy, and we offer our services on a sliding fee basis. When adults who have been sexually abused address the painful reality of the abuse, they're able to create safe, healthy relationships. The ripple effect of the abuse cycle into families and into the community comes to an end. Shepherd's Counseling Services really is a pretty unique place, and yes, I am biased. I like the place a lot. I work there. I have for nearly 10 years, and I am so honored to be able to do the work that I do. I don't love speaking about sexual abuse. However, I like talking about something that's going to help people, and Shepherd's Counseling Services helps people. We do individual and group therapy for adult men and women survivors. We do a very unique partner support group. There may be another partner support group out there. I am not aware of it, and from the responses we've gotten from the Oprah article, people aren't aware of it. But what our partner support group is, it's a support group for partners of people who have been sexually abused, because the relationship impact is huge, and it is a wonderful and welcome resource. We do couples therapy, community education and consult to professionals. All services are offered by experienced professional therapists on a sliding fee basis. We had a staff meeting. We have a monthly staff meeting at Shepherd's with the therapist, clinical meeting. And I looked around the room today and I realized how amazingly lucky Shepherd's is to have the wealth of clinical expertise that we have. Our therapists are not interns, not new people working at an agency to get experience, which is fine and necessary, and we all started there. However, this is a complicated topic, and so we have therapists at Shepherd's who have 10, 15, 20 years of experience, and they work at Shepherd's because they love the work. They work at Shepherd's not because they get paid a lot of money, but because working at Shepherd's, working with people who have suffered so much, is an opportunity to really make a difference in a life, and it changes people's lives. We provide long-term therapy because this is a long-term problem. So, and the solution, if you will, the healing, is a long-term life change. You can read the quote at the bottom, which is an actual quote from a client. And I'm going to let Jill finish, but this quote that's up on the board is a quote from someone who came to the agency. He was in his mid-70s, and he wrote out this piece, and he said, and a whole few paragraphs, and said, please share this with anybody. You have my permission. We don't share client quotes unless we have permission. But he had never told anyone. He was in his mid-70s when he came to Shepherd's, and I guess it just really keeps reminding me of how lucky I am to be able to do this work, and how much the services that Shepherd's offers really does change lives. So, yes?
That you mentioned that would be good to read with the kids listed on your website, or can you provide some information?
You know, I can send some to Teresa. We don't have them on our website because it's you know, providing therapy to children is not what we do, and so that gets kind of confusing. I mean, I have a couple that I use because I see some kids in my private practice occasionally, and I've done other things, been a school counselor and stuff, so I have resources, but you know, there are people who have far more resources than I do. So I can send Teresa the ones that I have, and she can pass them out. Okay. Thank you. Used up your time.
Wraps up. I'm sorry. I just wanted. There's a few questions there that I just wanted to talk a little bit more about before we have Jill wrap up. And with regards to how to protect your children and educate your children, there's quite a bit of questions I thought on that. And the thing that I wanted just to say is that there's a question about educating your children and does that help? And there's also another question, I think the gentleman left already, with regards to if it's a family member, how, you know, if it's a parent, how are we going to know, kind of thing. And I wanted just to say a couple things on the educating your children. My sister-in-law is a teacher, and she gave me this example because I was talking to her about sexual abuse, and she said that a child in the school came and said this kid hit them on their private part, and he didn't know what to say. He didn't know where, what, you know, like, and it turned out to be that they hit him on a rear end, on his bum, and he did not have the words to say whether he was hit, you know, on his bum, on his penis, like he did not know how to describe the physical action. And it's the same with children. The more you educate them and give them the tools so that if something is happening, if you just say, oh, they can't touch your private parts, but they don't know what it is. Is that their chest? Is it their vagina? Is it their penis? Is it their rear end? Is that okay? Is it not okay? You can't even begin to have the conversations with your children around what is and is not okay. And granted, you asked about every family is different. So in your family, you might say, you know, in our family, you know, you're going to see your mom and dad naked. That's okay, or your brother or your sister. But when you go to someone else's house, you know, you really shouldn't be seeing them naked. And what does that mean? A man with his shirt off walking around, or does that mean naked from head to toe? So I think on the education part, the part that's the most important is giving them the tools, both so that you can educate them on what is and is not okay, and also so that they can talk about with you what may or may not have happened, or ask questions about what is or is not okay. So the education component, while different for every family, because every family has different values, the basis of what is abuse does not change, right? And the basis of how to educate and teach your children about that, it's giving them the tools. It's like you don't write C code, right? If you don't know the C language, you don't know where to start. Well, if you don't know what to call things, you don't know where to start. So sitting down and talking with your children, and really, I'll send some resources, some books, but if you just go to any public library and start educating your children about their bodies, there's lots for toddlers, there's lots for teenagers, different age groups. If you just look those things up and start educating your children, then you have some tools and words, if you don't already, to talk to them about what is abusive and what is not abusive. You know, just saying to your child, you know, someone can or cannot touch their privates isn't necessarily enough information for them. And then the other topic was about family members. And I'd say on this, like, well, I think the number was 40% is by a family member. It may be a parent, a mom or a dad, which is even harder for the child than to go to the other parent, all the more reason to give them those tools and comfort levels. But it could be an aunt or an uncle, or you might observe your niece or nephew or a family friend that just seems very sexual around your child, like they're wanting to play with your child in their room very sexually, that might be an indication that that child's being abused. So don't just think about your own children. Obviously think about them, but think about the children that interact with your children, because it's really about protecting all children. And the more you can protect all children, the more you protect your own children, and the more you stop the cycle. And one of the other things that I know you sort of alluded to, and I don't know that there's real numbers on this, but what Shepherds does with stopping the cycle, I mean, not only quite often are children that are abused, not all children are abused, might end up on the streets or prostitutes. There's also people right here at Microsoft that are seemingly normal and functional and not prostitutes and not gone way off the deep end, but they still have lots of issues. And the fact is that families, abuse runs in families. So if a child was abused, they might abuse later. So you might have an aunt or an uncle or someone. So the more you can help heal those who have been victims, again, it's just one more tool in helping to prevent. It's not the only tool. Education your children, talking to them, preventing drops, helping those who have been abused. It's all tools. So I just wanted to kind of shed the bigger picture light, because I just heard a lot of questions about some of those things. But there are also some people or books that talk specifically, but I think, it's a lot around sexual education for your children is what the bottom line is. But it's also, a lot of the stuff, Janice, just knowing that it happens. Like, how many of you had any clue before coming in here? 3 to 4 girls are sexually abused, and 5 to 6 boys, 1 in 5 to 6 boys, and 1 in 3 to 4 girls. Raise your hand. I mean, I saw a lot of faces going, oh my gosh, did anyone have a clue that it was that high? So my thing to take back to all of you is know that it's high, and just that chunk that Janice really talked about, to some extent, well, it's not the answer. Just being aware that it's a problem, you can start educating yourselves and your children and your friends and your children's children and so forth. So there's some resources there. I'm happy to send around some books that I have used personally with my own children that I think are very valuable. There's also some people that, that have talked at various schools that I know of around just teaching adults how to even talk to their children. Like, how do you talk to a 3-year-old about, like my 3-year-old, we've sat down, we look through the book, like how babies are born, and, everyone has their own religious values and their own personal values, but you can decide what's right for you, right? You still want to give them the tools. And I can send some of those resources around to the Parenting Alias as well. I'd be happy to do that. But so I hope that sort of helps a little bit with some of those other questions. And Jill wrap up really quickly here. Sorry,
Yeah, so thank you for coming here. And hopefully, I think it's probably pretty clear that Janice could have gone on and on about this. So there's a lot of information, and our preference is definitely that this never happens in the first place. And this really is the place to start. And there is a possibility of intervening with the right kind of information. And we'd be happy to come back. We'd be happy to talk more. So keep that in mind. And as and we talked about what we do, we work with adults. And as Janice said, this experience in childhood does usually compound over time rather than dissipate, which is unfortunate, but we're really glad that we're here so that we can help people to start unraveling the pain and the different effects that this can have in somebody's life as they're struggling to cope with the confusion, the betrayal, and the emotional pain. Struggling with this issue can also show up in agencies that deal with homelessness, domestic violence, substance abuse, poverty, crisis intervention. It shows up in a lot of other places. And one thing that Shepherds offers is a place to really deal with the core issue and deal with it in a way where it's not just a Band-Aid in terms of, really short-term opportunity. We are able to, because of donors, period. I mean, that is what makes it possible to do what we do. And it's because of individual donations that we're able to provide adults who were sexually abused in childhood with the long-term therapy that really creates profound and lasting change in their lives and allows them to start creating a more healthy, safe, fulfilling their potential lives that does, the change lasts forever, and it does ripple throughout their families and throughout our communities. We have a budget of less than $200,000 a year. We're very small, and we want you to know that support for Shepherds does really go directly to the people that we serve. At least half of our budget every year comes from individual donors. Big national grants don't like to fund us because we don't crank them through, right? That's just not what we do, and we're not willing to do that. We're not willing to abide by the strings that are attached to a lot of alternate funding sources, and so it really is the support of individuals that makes our work possible. 84% of all of the money that we receive, both from client fees lumped together with donations, goes directly to client services. So we run a very lean, mean machine. And giving to Shepherds does have a direct impact on both prevention and healing. And that's one thing that I really love about the organization. It works itself in both directions. If you choose to support Shepherds Counseling Services, I know that Microsoft is having its annual giving campaign, and the matching funds that are available through the generosity of this corporation, and also the way the campaign monies are dispersed throughout the year, really do help our organization function all year long and provide these services without dips in availability of the scholarships and financial assistance that 68% of our clients received last year. So I just leave you with this. I would just ask you, how much would it be worth to you to prevent one child from being abused? How much would it be worth to you to change one person's life forever who was unfairly traumatized and betrayed in this way as a child? If you could do both, prevent and heal with one gift, how would that feel for you? Your gift to Shepherds does change lives forever. We would just ask you, how many lives would you like to change? What would you like to do? Your support makes a lifetime difference. Any amount of donation, and obviously the larger donation, the more people we can help, the more scholarships we can support, and the more people who can really change their lives forever in a profound and lasting way. Thank you for being here.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, and you're obviously all welcome to leave, but we'll hang out for a few minutes if anyone wants to talk more intimately, one-on-one. We're happy to do that as well.
So for the slides, you said they would be available.
Yep.